Now, let's see about making that thing list dynamic. We're still going to hard code some stuff, but we're going to hard code it in a different place. So I said that we were going to keep state out of ThingList and thing and manage it all at the app level. Now we said that to use state, you need to initialize state in your constructor, right? Well, with one of the newest features in JavaScript, there's actually another way to do that, using something called a property initializer. That allows us to set a property as though it were in the constructor without actually including a constructor. Now, this is an experimental feature. Experimental is maybe not quite the right word, but this is just a proposed addition to ECMAScript. Now, it has reached the second phase of that, where it's considered a draft spec. So it will be in ECMAScript eventually, and it is supported in Babel now, and Facebook is using it in production already. So I feel like it's safe to use, and it is very convenient, so we're going to do it. Again, a property initializer. Sounds fancy. It's very simple. So we're just going to initialize that property right here inside the class without bothering with the constructor. So we'll say state equals, and just create that object. So what we want in state is a list of things. This is very much like how we stored the roster in Mega Roster, except now React actually has the concept of state and gives us some extra behavior by using that instead of just creating a generic property. So things, we could make it an array. I'm going to choose not to make it an array this time. I'm going to make it an object. The list itself is going to be an object instead of an array. Why? Because it's going to be a lot easier to access individual things out of it the way I'm about to do it. Observe. So state is an object. Inside there we have things, which is another object. And each of my things is going to have a key that looks like this, thing-1. Notice I had to put quotes around that key because it does not follow the rules for variable naming. It has a dash in it. And then the value at that key is going to be the actual object, the actual thing. I'm going to give it an ID of thing1 and a name of milk. I can add another thing, predictably enough, key of thing2, ID that matches the key, thing2, and a name of bread, which should be a string, and thing3 with an ID of thing3, name bib lettuce, aka Boston lettuce. If you've never had bib lettuce or Boston lettuce, it is the king of lettuces. It makes romaine and iceberg lettuce look like water. Those things just taste like nothing. Bib lettuce is like candy. It's just delicious. It doesn't even need any dressing. So good. So ask your grocer about bib lettuce or Boston lettuce. I am a bib lettuce evangelist. So you see why I'm doing that? Instead of just being indexed numerically, they're indexed by their ID. That way, later on, I could say this.state.things square bracket thing2 and go straight to that. I don't have to use find to search through it and find the one I want, much less some kind of complicated loop. I can just go straight to that if I have the ID. Kind of handy. Downside, not being in an array, they're not implicitly ordered. So if I need to keep track of the order, I'll have to find another way to do it. But we're up to the challenge. So now we've hard-coded some things in state. But we need to be able to get to those from inside ThingList. How would we get to the state from app inside the ThingList component? Any ideas? Yes, sir, Clayton. Holy moly, I could pass it as a prop. That's right. So when I render ThingList down here, I could say things equal curly brace this dot state dot things. And now I can get to that from inside the ThingList. Now remember, your props are read-only. So we won't actually be able to change them from there. But we can get to them. But we'll deal with the fact that they're read-only another way. For now, that makes me very happy. Save that. And inside ThingList.js, now instead of just making this one thing, I'm going to make a thing for everything in things. I think. So now I passed in a prop. I need to be able to get to that prop. So I'm going to, in my argument list up here, just say props. That way props will be available as a local variable. I don't have to say this dot props. It's just a variable props because this is a stateless component. The whole component is just a function. So props.things contains this object that I want to loop over and make a thing for everything in the object. How should I do that? Who's got an idea? I know you guys are full of ideas. Come on. Who's got an idea? Yes, Sam. Could I use map? Map is what we've used when we want to do something to everything in an array. Now we've got an object instead of an array. How could we get an array out of that object? Sorry? One more time. A for loop. Yeah, that's too many. It's too much typing, man. My fingers hurt. So what do you mean by that? Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. McGuarley, you're going to have to speak louder. What? Well, I think you're on the right track. I just can't hear you. Okay. So what if we could get an array with all of the keys from that object? I think we know how to do that, right? So to put some JavaScript right here inside our UL, we'll just put some curly braces. Remember object.keys. Pass it our object, which is props.things. And that'll give us an array that looks something like the string thing1, the string thing2, the string thing3, right? Then we can map over that. I anticipate this line getting rather long, so I'm going to go ahead and break it up into multiple lines. So we could call map on the keys. And map takes a function, and that function is going to receive each individual key as its first argument, right? So I'll call that thing ID in my little arrow function here. And remember, in an arrow function, if there's only one argument, you don't actually need parentheses around it. And if your function's a one-liner, you don't need curly braces here either. So I'm not going to type them. And if that one line should be the return value, you don't actually have to write return either. So I'm not going to do that either. All I'm going to do is return some JSX, a thing, right? Heck, if we just do this, Now I get 3 of them, right? 1 for every key that was in that array. Now it still just says hello world. How can we change that? How? Pass the thing as a prop. We'll have a prop named thing. And what should it be? If it were thing ID, then that would just be the string thing1, thing2, or thing3, which is not really what we want, right? We want the whole object. So how would I pass that whole object as the value of this prop? Somebody knows. How could I get, yeah, Nick? Props.things, that's our object, right? Square bracket to get at one of the properties. When we don't actually know the name of the property, we know we have it in a variable though. Thing ID is the key, right? So props.things, square bracket, thing ID. Make sense? Thing ID is the current item in the array. The array is a list of all the keys in the object. So to get it back out, we'd use it just like we would I in an array. Cool. So now it's being passed in, I guess. We're not using it. Let's have a look over here in our browser at something. Did you all install the React DevTools during the setup process? We're going to start using that a lot. You can drag and drop these things to reorder them. So if your React tab is way at the end, go ahead and drag it toward the front because we're going to use it a lot. I put it right after elements and console. Look at the setup instructions for Mac on the. It should be under. It should be on the page about Chrome. So notice over here we have a list that looks very much like the element list on the Elements tab, except it actually shows us our components. So if you look at app here, if you highlight that over here on the right, you see a list of props and a list of state. So state here, it shows things, and there are all our individual items. Notice also it says $R in the console. So that means that while this is highlighted on the React tab, on the console, I can get to that component with $R, just like $0. So there it is. I can say $r.state.things. There it is. Very handy for troubleshooting. Now, if I want to drill down all the way to my things, it might get to be a pain to actually drill down because we could end up with a lot of components nested many levels deep, especially once we add routing to the mix. So there's a little search box here. So I just type thing, and lo and behold, I get every component that matches that. So notice, look at this thing. I see the prop thing. Notice it says that it's read-only because props always are. So there's my thing. Pretty groovy. So the prop is being passed down the way we expect. Thing 1, thing 2, thing 3. So let's do something with it. In thing.js, we can get to that. We could put props here and say props.thing.name or something like that. So instead of hello world here, we put curly braces and say props.thing.name. Save that. Milk, bread, bib lettuce. Hey, it works. Props.thing.name, that is just too many dots. I don't like it. I want a local variable called thing that stores just the thing. That would be just the thing. So, in my argument list, I can destructure that props object. What that means is take the individual properties of that object and assign them to variables. It's actually what we're doing when we import named components using curly braces. So I'm going to put curly brace thing. And what that's going to do is if my argument happens to have a property of thing, it's going to take the value at that property and assign it to a local variable named thing. So then down here, I wouldn't use props.thing. I would just use thing.name. And I'm right back to normal. Kind of wacky, a lot to get used to. This is an ES6 feature. But we're going to use it enough that hopefully you'll get used to it. Seth might add something about destructuring objects. I meant to do that. This says we have an error. Let's see what it is. That's, oh yeah. So we have a warning. Each child in an array or iterator should have a unique key prop. Check the render method of ThingList. All right, let's check the render method of ThingList. It spits out a bunch of things. And when we do this, when we loop over something and spit out a bunch of components, React needs a way to uniquely identify each of those. And it says it wants a key prop. So on the thing, we need a prop called key. What would make a good key? What would make a good unique identifier for everything in the list? This is a softball, guys. Say again? Charlie, is that you mumbling again? What number? Anybody besides Sam? The thing ID, right? Thing 1, thing 2, thing 3. That's going to be unique for each one. And this, by the way, is why I didn't name this key in my map. I could have, and it just would have said key equals key, and that's fine. But to make the point that the name key doesn't mean anything as the value, but it does mean something as the prop. The prop must be named key. That's what React wants. I went ahead and named it something else. Now that warning went away, and life is good.